Hey folks, I am here. I've got my LabVIEW program open, and I'm going to be showing you how we can create simulated signals. Okay, so over on the block diagram, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to this Express palette right here. Okay, I'm going to go over to the input and I'm going to go to this handy little simulate signal. Okay, and I'm just gonna place it up here at the top. And you can see I get this very cool looking window with a whole bunch of options. So for example, I could simulate a sine wave. I could simulate a square wave, a triangle, sawtooth, or even just a DC signal, constant DC signal, which would stand for direct current. That's going to be our our closest thing simulating the signal coming off of a temperature probe, okay? Which will be a direct current measurement, okay? So, and I can do all kinds of fun things here. I can say add noise. And so that's going to simulate having a probe that has noise, right? That has uncertainty. And you can see there it is right here. And I could change the amplitude of this noise. I could turn it down right here. And so you can see now it's going plus or minus 0.2 from this 0 value offset. I could change that offset to a value of 10, for example, and see there it goes to a value of 10, plus or minus 0.2, okay? You can see right now on this time scale, it's going from 0 to, let's call it 0.1 seconds. So that's coming from the fact that it's taking 1,000 samples per second. So my sampling rate is 1,000 hertz. And we're viewing 100 samples at a time. So if you think about that dimensional analysis, 100 samples multiplied by one, per second, right, in hertz, then we get 0.1 as our time scale, okay? So, but it's kind of making my computer sluggish because I'm using this over the internet, right? So I'm going to go ahead and turn that down to 100 samples, okay? And now I'm only viewing 10 samples at a time, so it's still over my 0.1 seconds. And I'm going to uncheck the automatic, and I'm going to also make that 100. Let's see what happened, 100 and 100. And so I'm still seeing my 100 samples, but now look, it's over a period of 0.1 seconds, okay? So we're gonna use that. For my timestamps, I'm gonna say relative to the start of my measurement because I don't care about the actual day and time that I do this. We're gonna use continuous generation. I'm gonna say simulate acquisition timing. And here we go. So you can see that's a lot more realistic. So I am getting all 100 of these data points every 1 second. So you can actually, that update that you see going on, that's every 1 second, okay? And instead of using this signal name, I'm gonna call this, let's see here, we're gonna say simulated temperature probe 1, okay? And I think that's all pretty good. I've got some options for the type of noise that I can add. We're just gonna say uniform white noise. And now I'm gonna say okay. And now I still have a lot of work to do, all right? So the first thing I'm gonna do is scroll all the way down, and all of those things I was able to change, such as the noise amplitude, the offset, and a few of those other things that I didn't bother to go into, I can now wire up controls for these things. And I can also wire out the signal, okay? So what would be useful now in my front panel, of course, would be to have a graph that I can use. So let's see here. I want to get the tools palette up here. And I like to use, to turn off the automatic tool selection. That's what I prefer. So let's get a graph. Actually, I want a chart because I want to view this point by point in time. Okay, there is my chart. All right, and I'm going to make this wired up nice and tight. I like a nice, clean block diagram. And before I get into wiring this up, I'm going to show you there's a lot of really cool things I can do here getting this graph to look the way that I like. So I'm going to right click in this, chart. I'm going to right click in the chart and say properties, okay? And I got a whole bunch of options here, okay? So I don't really need to see the that waveform chart. Okay, but what I do want to see, what I think is more useful, is if I call this temperature probe 1, for example. And so it changed it on the block diagram right there. And then over here, I'll say temperature probe 1. So my user knows that that's the data coming from my temperature probe. So let's see, what else can I do? There's all kinds of options here. So I think I'm pretty happy with everything over here. So let's go to the display format. For my time scale, I'm going to keep it on floating point. I might come back to some of this after we see some data just to see what it looks like. Okay. For digits, sure, let's add 1 digit. So there I can see that 100.0. And I can do digits of precision or significant digits, okay? I'm going to keep it on digits of precision. So I see that point 0, I can see 1/10 of a second for each measurement. And so then on my Y scale amplitude, I'm also going to do floating point. And I'm going to go digits of precision as well. And I'm going to uncheck hide trailing zeros, and you can see it added all those digits. I don't need that many, so maybe also 0.0 is good right there too. And let's see, on the Y scale, yes, that was the hiding trail zeros was off. Okay. So under plots, I've got a whole bunch of things that I can do here. I could make the line a little bit thicker, so that's all good there. My name, there it is. That's the legend, the plot 0. But I don't really need the legend. So I'm going to take that off because I only have 1 signal coming through there. In the case that I had multiple signals coming through, I could put that legend on and then I could modify each signal coming through. All right, so we'll leave that alone for now. And then if I go to the scales, I want to view, let's view a nice round 120 seconds at a time. 2 minutes, or yes, 2 minutes. And I want to say time seconds. So when I get that updated right there. And I also want my ticks and stuff to look a little bit nicer, so I can click this button right here, and there's several automatic settings that I can pick. So I just picked this one right there. All right, and I could even start adding in grids. So here are some auto choices. So there's for major grids, major and minor grids, and you can even see I could change those colors as well if I want. Okay. And I like it. Okay, so now let's go to the Y scale. And instead of amplitude, I'm going to call it temperature. And we'll just put a C there. And similarly, I'm gonna uncheck the auto scale here because temperatures that we might measure in the laboratory, could be, let's just say we might do anything between like room temperature, like 20 degrees, maybe all the way up to boiling water. Those might be reasonable temperatures to see in the lab, okay? And then similarly, I'm gonna pick this and I'm gonna put it on those scales right there. Okay, beautiful. And then now I think everything I'm pretty happy with. Oh, over here, I could also add those things. And so now I've got some nice grid lines if I want there, okay? And maybe I don't need to see all the minor grid lines. So that's pretty good like that. And then now, just to go through a couple more of these things, you know, I could add a description if I want. I could add a data bin and so on and so forth. But I think that's okay for now. And if the data, if it doesn't look very nice, if it's coming out, I can come back and change things. Okay, so I'll push OK. And then now what I'm going to do is wire up this simulated temperature directly into the probe. Beautiful. And when I did that, oh, I probably should have wired it first, because you'll notice now it changed it to my timestamp. So I'm going to go back to my simulated signal and just make sure that I told it that I want, yeah, relative to the start of the measurement. Okay, so I think it probably just reset that default. So I'm going to right click in here and say properties. And what did it do on display format? Oh yeah, look, it made me go absolute time. And so I could say relative time, and it's still keeping track of it as if it's a clock. But I want to just go back to that floating point so that I can view you know, over like a specified number of seconds. Like I think I said I wanted 120 seconds. And then of course I lost my scale. So when in doubt, sometimes it hides. Yes, there it is. It just gets resized right there. Okay, so that's great. So now, of course, I need to be able to control the actual value of the signal. And that's this offset. So I'm going to right click. And I'm going to say we want a numeric control, and I'm going to use a vertical point slider is fine for this. Okay. And there it is right there. I'm going to just move it so that it's nice and clean. And let's go ahead and wire it up. And what I also want to do now is let's make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go size like 24, that looks nice. And I'm gonna also scale this up. Okay, great. And I'm also gonna change the name of this, and I'm gonna say this is simulated temperature, and I can even push carriage return probe 1 in centigrade. And I'm gonna kind of move that a little bit. And to match this scale, I'm also gonna say, text edit. Let's make this go from 20 to 100 as well. And let's see here. And of course, if I want this to run continuously, I need to put it in a while loop. So let's do that. So I'm going to right click on my block diagram and say structures, while loop, and I'm just going to draw a loop around this thing and leave room for putting other things in. So here is my stop button, and I'm going to right click and say create control. And here it is right here. And on these stop buttons, I like to right click there and say visible items and turn off the label. I don't need it to say stop twice. And so I'm also gonna make this bigger. That's nice, okay. So I should, in principle, now be able to run this and simulate temperature as if I actually have a probe hooked up to this thing. So, oops, let's push play. And let's see here if I turn this up now. Oh, there it goes. So we can see there's my signal. And I'm getting a data point every 1 second, okay? And certainly if I was using, if I wasn't doing this over VLab, as we will eventually do in the actual lab, we will be able to get LabVIEW to work much, much faster than 1 second. But if all I'm doing is visualizing data from a temperature probe, perhaps I'm slowly heating something up. I'm kind of going to simulate slowly heating this up. Maybe all I would want to do here is just visualize the temperature of this thing rising, until it maybe gets to some steady value. And then once it gets to this steady value, perhaps now I know I'm ready to do my experiment. If I was boiling a liquid, for example, okay? So now let's go ahead and stop that. And I'm gonna keep kind of cleaning up my block diagram. I like to keep a clean block diagram, just so I know where everything is. And let's see here, I can move the font down below right here, just making room for myself. And what I also want to point out here is, you notice as soon as I moved that around, my wire kind of got all crazy. I can select that wire and use my arrow keys to move it over. And I like doing that just so I know, there we go, I can see that this wire is going into the offset. Okay. So now what I also want to simulate is having some noise, okay? So I'm gonna go in here, oops, nope, I don't want Mathematica open right now. So let's see here, I'm gonna go in here and I can say, let's see, Y scale, and I'm gonna auto scale the Y, okay? And then now as soon as I push, oh, and also, sorry, I wanna wire up an ability to simulate the noise, okay? So let's use a knob for that. So I'm going to go to numeric, or a dial, a knob, sure, why not? Let's try a dial, okay? And I'm going to put that right there, beautiful. And I'm going to say here, simulated noise. If I can spell or type, probe 1. Just so I know I can be consistent with what's happening here. And I'm gonna, let's see here. Yeah, we'll make it a little bit bigger so we can see. That looks nice. We'll move you out of the way. We can also make your font bigger so we can all see a little bit better. Lovely. Let's resize you. Okay. And I don't need this noise to go all the way up to a factor of 10. So let's just make it like 1. Okay, great. And so now what I'm gonna do here, okay, I'm gonna check it off, and let's push play, okay? And so now what I've got going on, there is my noise, okay? And this is pretty cool, so I'm gonna set this to about 0.2 or so, okay? And so you can see this value is about 66 or so, and you can see I'm simulating having some noise, which is kind of cool, okay? So I should be able to turn this noise way down, well, I should have been able to turn the noise way down. Well, let's first start by turning the noise way up, and that should work. Oh my gosh, you guys, do you know what I didn't do? You probably know what I didn't do. I actually didn't wire up this knob, so let's do that, okay. So here we go. Lovely. So now let's push play. And, okay, fantastic. So look, you can see here that I'm about 66 or so, and I'm saying noise of 1, and I'm getting that noise. Let's go ahead and stop. So remember, every time you want to edit, you have to stop. And just so we can actually see what these values are, I'm going to right-click on the slider and say Visible Item, Digital Display. And let's move it over here. And because I've made the font big, I need to resize it. And yeah, we'll move you over a little bit. Great. And I'm going to right-click on the knob and say Visible Items, Digital Display. And there you are. Oops, let's separate. So I have issues clicking around on this thing just like you people do. Okay, so now let's go ahead and push play. And I've also got on the simulated signal, one of the settings was to automatically clear out the old data. Okay, So lovely. So now, you know, I'm at 66.2 or so, plus or minus 1, and we can see that. And now I should be able to turn this noise way down. And there we go. So now I turned the noise down to 0.1. And if I go ahead and while this is running, I can actually right click and say clear chart. And it'll re-auto scale for me. And yes, that's awesome. So now you can see, you know, maybe if I were to go up a little bit, we can see now, yep, it's auto scaling as it goes up, which is cool. So 77 degrees plus or minus 0.1 or so, and that's fantastic. Now, what I should notice, because we're simulating this, 77.2477, that's not the actual measurement. It's the value of my slider, but really my measurement is 77.2477 plus or minus 0.107755. Okay, so we kind of have to ignore these values because this is simulated. So another thing that I can do if I wanted to visualize the actual number, the signal coming out, okay, I'm going to add a numeric indicator. I'm going to put that on there. Let's go ahead and make that bigger. Sure, 36. And I don't need to see the font, the numeric, so I'm going to get rid of that. So I'll just have it right under here so I know that that's the value. And oh, here it is on my block diagram, okay? And I'm gonna wire this up by just taking the signal out and putting it right into that numeric, okay? And then what I also want to demonstrate on this, I'm gonna go back and do a slightly faster sample rate just so you can kind of see what I'm getting at here. I'm gonna go to this 1000 hertz sampling frequency and still keep it at 100 samples, okay? So now I'm gonna get a data point every 0.1 seconds. And now let's run this program. Okay, fantastic. So this number that we're seeing right there, that's realistically what we would see from a probe, especially if we were using a sampling frequency of 1000 hertz, 1000 samples per second, and visualizing 100 of those data points at once, we'd be seeing a messy measurement, okay? And, you know, if I turn down that noise, maybe I've got a really nice, clean probe, you can see that it's a little bit less noisy. If I crank it way up, check out the values, right? They're all over the place, okay? So obviously we're gonna have to deal with, you know, how do we, for one, save this data? But two, if I needed to record that temperature in my lab notebook, let's suppose that I wanted to know, like, well, what's the damn temperature? It's all over the place. There's ways that I can do some inline data analysis on this thing. So I could take the root mean square, I could take the mean. There's a number of things I could do to really lock in on this value, okay? And those are gonna be the subjects of the next videos. Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed this.